Let's talk about resistances in Path of Exile 2. And as a new player myself, currently in the making of this video, I made the grave mistake of not understanding these sooner because I had already assumed that resistances in this game would be applied very similarly to other MMOs and ARPGs. Something like having fire resist would prevent your character from being able to catch fire and be burned. Something like having poison resist would prevent your character from being poisoned. Things like having ice resist would potentially protect your character from being frozen. But in Path of Exile, it's actually treated much differently. And in this video, I'm going to break it down and make it really simple to understand. And then by the time you're done this, you're going to know exactly what you need to do and where. So here we are in the game right now. I'm on my toon right now. I'm currently playing in Ice Monk. My resistances are actually doing pretty good on this character. And I'm just using straight up evasion and energy shield, and you don't need to concern yourself too much with that with the build that you're doing, but let's focus on just the resistances. So I'm going to break it down really simple for how I've learned to understand it, and hopefully this makes sense. Resistances, I would treat as a stat that would be comparable to armor, and I would honestly argue that your resistances would be a more important statistic than your armor. And the reason why is because it's not treated the way we talked about earlier with preventing burn, preventing freezes, preventing poison. It actually, in Path of Exile 2, it mitigates damage from that damage type. Meaning that if I were to receive 100 fire damage and I have a 75% fire resist on my character, I would receive 25% of that fire damage, mitigating a very large volume of that damage. The mistake that I was making prior was I was not running really any resistances because I didn't know and understand why I needed them so badly. So instead, what I was doing was I was building my armor, my evasion, my energy shield, and things like that. And then when I would go into mapping, as low as like tier 2, tier 3, I would be getting absolutely dunked on by mobs. I'd be getting blown up. Some mobs would one-shot me. I would see fire meteors from the sky, and if they'd land on me, I would blow up and implode. And it made my mapping experience tremendously difficult simply because I didn't understand this. Once I started adjusting and adding resistances to my gear, I found that my survivability went up by a dramatic amount, and my evasion was lower, my energy shield was much lower in replacement for these resistances, and now I see what I'm doing wrong. Obviously, having your protections and having your resistances and everything as a combined whole is going to add up to an entire amount of your defense, but running resistances is going to be crucial for this exact reason. Now, what you do is you cap at 75%, but you would notice that there is a statistic beside the 75%, and it's the 93. That is the total resistance that I have. You can go higher and go up to a higher resist amount, and I'll talk about where that comes from. But if you have an overflow of resistance, it's not bad to have because you may go into maps that will lower your resistance. So say, for example, I'm at 75 fire resist, and I go into a map that removes 20% of it, well then I will be obviously at 55, but it'll pull that additional amount that I have from this 93 total. So instead, I'll actually be going down to 73% fire resist if I were to be taken away the amount of 20. And do note that when I was not focusing on resistances, I was actually in the negative. You can go into a negative resistance amount. And I would compare this to adding a multiplier on the damage that you can receive. So for example, I was like negative 60% on ice. I think I was like negative 40% on fire. And what that would do is it would tack on an additional amount of damage that I was receiving from that specific monster type. So when you're going through and crafting your gear, or enhancing your gear, I should say, things that you're going to want to focus on are going to be obviously, yes, your armor stat, but as I've mentioned, your resistances. And things that you can do would be rolling for those resistance types, as well as trying to potentially put resistance stones in your gear. Now, I'm not telling you to do that, but that is an option that you can do. So something that I have here, let me see if I can find one. Usually you'll try to get 3 resistance stats on something. So let's see, I know I have something here. So this ring right here would be a fantastic example of what I'm talking about. I would try to roll for 2, if not for sure 3 stats of resistances on my gear. That's what I'm trying to do. And you'll notice that this ring has fire resist, cold resist, and lightning resist. And then as I put on my gear and take my gear off, you'll notice that your statistics on the left-hand side may change. So for example, if I'm trying to craft something and I'm like, hey, I've actually got a pretty decent amount of fire resistance compared to my lightning resistance you can see below me. Well, then what I would try to do is maybe roll more lightning resist, or if I have a socket available on a piece of gear, well, then maybe what I'll do is I'll add a storm rune to my armor to add some more lightning resist to that armor. And then as I put my gear back on, you'll see my resistances change. And these are ways that you will want to build your gear. This is going to be, in my opinion, a necessary statistic to focus on when we're talking about resistances specifically, in order to add much more survivability to your gameplay. Again, I found myself going into mapping with negative resistances, and at lower tier maps, I was getting destroyed. As soon as I adjusted my gear, took a step back, added some more resistances, my armor did go down, and I wasn't a fan of seeing it, but my survivability went up in a dramatic fashion. So all of this is going to add to the entirety of your character's survivability. So once again, if I receive 100 fire damage, but I have 75% fire resistance, I'm going to receive 25% of that fire damage. If I am negative, let's just say 100%, okay? I'm negative 100% fire resistance. Well, then instead of receiving 100 fire damage, instead I'm going to receive 200 fire damage, double the damage on top of everything else that may be going on in the maps that we are playing in. It is a very, very, very big statistic you need to focus on. Now, while on this character, I'm capped out at 75%, your cap actually can be raised up to a total of 90% from what I've learned, but this can also be obtained from passives that will be in either your skill tree or additional suffixes and prefixes that you can place into your gear and enhance into your gear, which are all great things to focus on, especially since I've also mentioned that you can go into maps that do lower your entire resistance total. Unfortunately, a lot of these statistics aren't very easily explained to new players in the very beginning, myself included. You have to go through a lot of trial and error if you really, really want to understand a lot of the in-depth details of this game. And it's not very overcomplicated. It's just there's a lot of things to understand that sometimes all of it as an entirety starts to become overwhelming. And there's a lot to consume, but a lot of it isn't hard to understand, in my opinion. I was building gear, trying to go, why are these people building resistances and being so happy about them? I'm like, I don't care if I get lit on fire. I don't care if I get well, maybe frozen, but still, it made no sense to me at first. Now it does. If you scroll down on this character sheet as well, you can see a resistance subsection here, and you can see the total of max resistances you may have on this character. So my lightning resistance on this character goes up to a total of 78. That additional 3% is most likely coming from a piece of gear that I have on. And again, those are where you can find things like this as well. I do find that the biggest resistance that is pretty hard to obtain, it's not the most common one, is actually the chaos resistance. So again, if you can find a healthy balance between capping out all your resistances, then falling into other additional stats such as percentage gain bonuses off of your armor, evasion, or energy shield, I feel like all of those play a really important role. As of the making of this video, we're currently still in early access. People have also mentioned to me, on top of your resistances and percentage gained on your armor that you may be wearing, the percentage in rarity of items found can potentially make a dramatic difference in your gameplay and experience. However, while currently valuable, could also change in the near future. So I would tread lightly with that specific comment. But one thing that I feel very confident that is not going to change is how resistances operate in this game, and they work. And hopefully I have broken this down in a way that is easily digestible, understandable, and makes much more sense to you. So if you are one of those players that is currently in the end game mapping situation, you're having a hard time understanding why you're blowing up, the game is much harder than it needs to be, this could be potentially an issue that you're running into. I myself ran into this and I went, wow, like I really do not feel like my skill as a player is the issue. I feel like this is a gearing issue, but I really had a hard time understanding where it was coming from. When I was looking at my gear, I was like, what the heck? Like I've got a percentage increase on my armor. I've got this, I've got that. My energy shield's good. My max life is up. But why am I what feels like taking an unnecessary amount of damage when I'm fighting against mobs that are debatably like almost 10 levels lower than myself? It starts to feel monotonous because you're just sitting here running on a treadmill, battling against mobs that are now becoming further and further away from being able to generate a proper experience pool for your gameplay. If you do have any other additional comments to add, I please encourage you to put them down in the comments section below. If I do need to touch up on this video again, I absolutely will. But as a new player myself, just learning about this game, I really want to take the opportunity to try to offer the things that I have learned in hopes that it finds the players who are also new going through these types of struggles and need to hear this as well. This video is getting a little bit long-winded for my liking at this point, so I'm going to put this topic down here. I do hope this was very helpful, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe if you'd like to check out more, and consider giving the video a like if it was helpful. Take care.